Start streaming. It's good. Yeah, hi everyone. This is Christian Sasse, Sasse Photo, and it's another Friday. We got an exciting show. Nicole brought up something wonderful. So for those of you who don't know me, so I run the conservation channel. It's all about education of wildlife. And we've got a great guest today with over 6,000 injured birds per year. It's going to be very interesting for you to see. So, and we've got a new co-host. I'm very excited to introduce that person. I'll leave it at that. So I'll see you in a moment, in just a few minutes. We are maybe about 2 minutes late, but nothing to worry about. No, it's again, it's on mute. Okay, once again, I think I unmuted it now finally. So thank you everyone for joining. We are on 3 channels in parallel. So we are on YouTube, we are on Periscope and Facebook. And I've got a wonderful team who helps look at all your questions. We've got a very exciting show today. We're going all the way to New Jersey to a huge raptor center, actually with a lot of reputation. They've done this for a long time, very respectable organization. So we're very excited. It's 8 o'clock their local time. So here in Vancouver, it's just after 5 p.m. But before I do that, I would like to, and I'm very happy to introduce you to a new co-host. So here comes Rebecca. Okay, so this is Rebecca. So Rebecca's, tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. Hi everybody, I'm super excited to be helping Christian out on his channel. So I grew up in the Fraser Valley, around where Christian does a lot of his eagle viewing, and I have a Bachelor of Science in Ecological Restoration, and I'm an outdoor educator. So I have a similar passion to Christian in just educating people on kind of the stuff that they see out in their neighborhoods on a daily basis, but maybe they don't know a lot about. So super excited to be here on the channel. It's like an awesome opportunity.
Well, Rebecca, we're very excited to have this, especially the younger generation, which is wonderful. So let's get right to it before we go there. Can you, Leah, why don't you give an introduction? I don't know if you can stand, if they'll see you actually. Let's try. Yeah, they will. So
yeah, I'm
try.
a lot shorter than Christian.
She's the perfect person for this, so go ahead.
Yeah. So right here is where the Raptor Center is in Millington, and it's just a little bit over from New York over here. And I don't remember what else you wanted me to tell them about it.
Oh, just tell them a little bit about what you know. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's where it is. So it's very close to New York. And you said something interesting to me earlier, which I thought remarkable, because you were talking about, you know, how many birds there were before and how many there are now. And that will bring us a nice introduction to our guests.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're a raptor rehab center, are all birds, but Christian obviously talks a lot about eagles on this channel, and back in 1973, when some legislation was put in place for protecting migratory birds, there's actually only 1 pair of nesting bald eagles left in the whole state of New Jersey. And now today there's over 150 nesting pairs, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, so that's a very nice surprise. So without further ado, I'm going to bring in our guests now. So 1 second, let's just see if I manage this. Bring in the title. So here we go. I'm going to just put on my headphones so I hear them. So I would like to introduce you from, oops, and here we go again. One second, there's something wrong here. This is iTunes coming in. Okay, sorry, we're back now. So I would like to introduce to you Chris, and you have to help me pronounce your surname because we were cut off. I was going to ask you, Chris.
Sasse.
Soucy, thank you very much. So it's Chris Sasse and Dr. Jennifer Norton, who's a veterinarian. And I'm so glad to have you. We're very honored, and thank you to Nicole for making this possible to bring you online. So we're watching all the channels. We'll take your questions on board, but just give us a brief introduction of who you are, and I'll show maybe a little bit of pictures in the background. You're
Sure.
on Wikipedia and many other things. So go ahead, please.
Okay, I can give a little background for the organization. I'm a second-generation director here. My parents founded this organization, so I've been involved with wildlife rehabilitation literally since my 4th birthday. We moved to this area in the late 60s. My folks had gotten real interested in wildlife at a time when there wasn't really any wildlife rehabilitation being done. It wasn't even legal in any sense. There was simply no one was doing it. So my folks were real interested in wildlife and birds in particular. My father was cooperating with the Fish and Wildlife Service, banding migratory birds along the Appalachian Mountains, and he just got a reputation in the area as someone who was real knowledgeable about birds. And when people in our neighborhood at first started finding injured birds, they just brought them to the house and said, "Hey, Len, you have to help us." And fortunately for him, one of his bird watching colleagues and bird banding colleagues was a veterinarian who said, "I'll help you. I think we can do this." And they got it wrong a lot at first, but eventually they established some protocols for anesthesia and some orthopedic surgery that were successful. And there were a few kind of pioneers in the wildlife rehab community in the mid 60s, and I like to think that my dad was one of them. So we've been doing it here for over 50 years. Our organization just celebrated its 35th year as a 501c3 nonprofit. We've taken in over 130,000 wild birds here in New Jersey, and that's not just raptors, although our research focus and our real passion is birds of prey. But we handle songbirds and waterfowl. I mean, anything that gets injured in the state that is in need of help. People bring us things that are just this big, little hummingbirds, or very, very big, great blue herons, eagles, saw-whet owls, all kinds of things. Just about every bird that occurs in the state, and quite a few that are not supposed to occur in the state have shown up at our door. So we've been at it a long time. We have a terrific and very large staff, and we have a very talented veterinarian, Dr. Jennifer Norton, who gets to do some of the really interesting and absolutely disgusting dirty work.
All right, so you said that your organization has been around for a long time, and your dad, Len, had an interest in banding migratory birds. And one thing I thought that was really cool about some of your history was, could you tell us a little bit about the red-tailed hawk Old Gal that you banded back in 1983?
Yeah, the bird came in, boy, you've been reading up on it. You may have to correct me on some of the facts, but I think I have most of the story. It was a bird that had come in for rehab. It was found in New York State and brought to us for rehab. It was successfully rehabilitated and released. And then 27, I think, or possibly 28 years later, was found again, injured. Unfortunately, was not able to be released. We kept her here for a while, but it was it's difficult to capture a wild bird, particularly a bird of prey. It's even more difficult to capture the same one twice. So getting a return on a bird that has the federal band on it, the ID band, is it's always exciting when we get some of that data. So this was a bird that was really interesting because not only had it been captured twice, but it was brought here twice. It was the same bird. It was like a homecoming. So Old Gal stayed here then for another 5 or 6 years. She couldn't be released. She was really in rough shape. She was missing in town and had a lot of feather damage and was really, really beat up from 27 trips up and down the North American flyways to who knows where. I mean, I wish I could know those stories. Did she go to Panama? Did she go to Mexico? But she was a real survivor, and she stayed here as a foster parent. And we get a lot of juvenile red-tailed hawks in the springtime, and she helped raise the next several generations of birds up, and that's a wonderful practice that is really helpful when we have an adult female who's got that breeding instinct, and clearly she'd been doing it for a long time. She was able to help us raise and release a whole lot of other juvenile red tails. It was a cool little story.
Yeah, Chris, I'm just curious. I'm just going to blend in the Wikipedia page now, because you were the first raptor center I've ever saw that actually appears in the Wikipedia. So that is quite a considerable. That's quite an achievement. You of course have your own web page. I've just shown it, and I just want to show our viewers also. excuse me, the Facebook page. So one thing that Rebecca found, which I thought was very interesting, is she told me that you have a lack of barred owls in your area, which we have such an abundance of.
Yeah.
So what's going on there?
Well, it's a threatened species in the state. Barred owls here on the East Coast really prefer wet, swampy areas. We're fortunate right where we are because we're right next to the Great Swamp National Wildlife Refuge. So there are breeding pairs right in our neighborhood, but statewide, they are a threatened species. And I think that's due to lack of habitat. You know, it's a pretty urban environment, and a lot of development. The first thing that developers do is they dry up wet areas and pave them over. So I think barred owls on the East Coast have lost a lot of habitat, and now their breeding population is threatened. But we're fortunate that we do get to hear them in the woods right here, because we are quite literally in a swamp. And not all places on the East Coast that were once wet are wet anymore.
Okay, so you've given us such a wonderful array of pictures and also 3 videos. Would you like me to go through some of them, and maybe you can comment on what we see here? I started off with this amazing picture. This looks like an older picture of snowies. So
yeah,
can you talk a bit about this?
We had a couple of snowy owls in many years ago. Gosh, this is probably late 80s or early 90s, and we had a pair that actually bred here. I think it was probably, and may still be, the only breeding pair recorded in the state of New Jersey, because as you know, they're sort of an Arctic breeding species. And it was really fantastic to have these just crazy little funny, just ridiculous looking fuzzy babies. But we were able to raise them, and because their parents were captive and had been injured, were not able to be released into the wild. But the young had the advantage of being raised by snowy owls, so we were able to release all of them a little further north, got them up to northern New York State along the Canadian border, and a couple of them even into Canada. But those that pair bred here for several years in a row, and we had raised up a whole lot of little snowy owl babies. We're not officially a breeding facility, but you put birds in a cage together, and sometimes that just happens. It's hard to turn that instinct off, you know, it just happens.
So the title of our YouTube broadcast today is Handling 6,000 Injured Birds Per Year. So could you tell us like a little bit about handling that many mouths to feed, and kind of the breakdown of what types of birds you get in at the center?
Sure, I can give you the thumbnail on that. And for the actual handling of them, I'll turn it over to Jennifer, because she has more of the injured and diseased birds in her hands than I do. About 10% of the birds that we take in are raptors. The large majority of birds we take in the spring and early summer, they are orphaned and not necessarily injured or diseased. We get just lots and lots of birds that, for one reason or another, are displaced from the nest or separated from their parents. People do spring cleaning and they cut down a tree, and then there's a screech owl nest or a downy woodpecker nest in it, and then we get sometimes a log with a hole in it, and it's full of woodpeckers. Mourning doves and robins have their nests blown out of trees in bad storms. Birds fall out of nests, or mama duck might get squashed in the road and someone shows up with a paper bag full of 10 baby ducks. Anything that you can imagine that could possibly happen to a baby bird nest has happened, and we get a lot of orphans. There's one right there being fed by one of our resident red tails. So the large majority of birds we take in are orphans. So we're very busy in the spring and summer. And fortunately, it's not all medical care. It's time intensive and labor intensive, and it's a lot of sort of food in and cleanup on the back end, quite literally. But it's a very busy time here. in the spring. And for the medical stuff and the injuries that we see, I'll let Jennifer tell you what she sees in the infirmary.
So a lot of the stuff that we see is not necessarily diseases, but mostly impact injuries and trauma. A lot of lacerations, a lot of broken wings, birds that have been hit by cars, birds that need surgery. So that's kind of the majority of what we see. The other part of what we see is diseases, parasitic diseases, birds that, a lot of times birds will be hit by a car, or they will have a certain type of impact injury because they've got something else underlying going on. So you deal with the trauma, but then you also have to deal with whatever the original cause was. You know, why were they not able to cross that road correctly? It's because they have cataracts in their eyes because they're so old, or something like that. So it's all varied in what we see and how we approach the medical care. But like I said, most of it is trauma, impact injuries, a lot of surgeries, a lot of lacerations, a lot of constriction injuries we see with fishing line, birds getting caught in soccer nets, things like that. So
by and large, the injuries that we see are caused by interaction with people or human activity or human buildings. So, you know, hit by car, smashed into a window, power line, fishing lures, lead pellets from the bottom of a pond, all kinds of things that are, you know, at their very root come from human activity.
Yes.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. I was doing some research on local rehab centers, and here in British Columbia, the stats say that between 75 and 80% of the injuries caused are by human activities. Would you guys say that's about similar down there?
I would say that's spot on.
Okay, so I'm going to take a question now. So please, everybody from YouTube, from Facebook, and also we can see a Periscope is in. Just ask your questions now. So the question number one, and that's from tree climbing. By the way, very nice to see you all. I see Sasha, Amanda, I see Jack Molan, Osprey, Mama, Wobbies, tree climbing, and so on and so on. I've seen Susan North, and you're all there. Thank you very much for joining us, all the loyal all the loyal viewers. So question number one is actually from tree climbing. What is the food that they give the raptors?
The food?
Yes, the food that you give
your
raptors.
We try to mimic their diet that they would have in the wild as closely as possible. So the little guy you've got on the screen there, it's a young juvenile kestrel. So they get lots of small rodents, little mice in the springtime and summertime when we're raising up the babies in order to encourage them to learn to hunt. We buy a lot of live crickets because the kestrels do eat a lot of insects in the wild. So most of the rodents we get come from breeding facilities that supply rodents to either the pharmaceutical industry or to the pet stores and things like that. So we don't use any roadkill. Every once in a while, people will come by with a half a deer that they found on the side of the road and say, hey, wouldn't your vultures like to eat this deer? And yes, I'm sure the vultures would love to eat it, but we try not to introduce any variables. We have a pretty healthy population of birds here. So we source the food from a lot of places. Some of it is donated and some we purchase, but we try to mimic the diet as carefully as we can to match that as we'd find in the wild. So our peregrine falcons eat a lot of quail from the local quail farm. The larger raptors that we have here, our bald eagles get a lot of fish. Our golden eagles get large rats, and we're able to procure that from a lot of different sources.
All right, and we have another question from Jill Weiss, and she asked, what happened to Uno the eagle?
Uno is a more or less one-winged. Nope. That's not true. Uno is the female. She has one eye. There was an impact injury. I think she came originally from Maine. We have two bald eagles, one from Maine, one from Alaska. I might have my facts incorrect here, but Uno suffered some impact injury and had some trauma to her head, and has just one eye now. She can't be released, and various other things from getting knocked. We're not quite sure what that impact was. Oftentimes, we don't really know what happened. We see the result of what happened. So when we find a screech owl, it's by the side of the road and it has impact injury, our guess is, well, it was hit by a car. But unless someone actually can walk in and say, I hit this with my car and picked it up, often we just see sort of a bird that's been beaten up pretty good. And Uno is a impact injury survivor, but non-releasable due to the severity of the injuries.
Yeah, Chris and Jennifer, I really admire what you do. This is just my own question, because I was very curious when I was talking to Chris yesterday that you're so close to New York. That's unreal for me. I think it's only something under 30 miles. So I'm just curious about the location and wildlife as such. What type of animals do people bring in? How is wildlife doing in such a big city as New York?
Oh, well, there's probably too many people there, my personal opinion. But where we are in central New Jersey, we're kind of sandwiched in between the coastal flyway and the Appalachian Mountains. So there's really a lot of migratory activity here. Cape May, which is the southern tip of New Jersey, is one of the greatest birdwatching places really on the planet. The bottom half of New Jersey is sort of bordered on both sides, one by the Atlantic and another by the Delaware. So birds that are kind of coming down all get funneled, if they're terrestrial and flying over land, to this very narrow little tip of New Jersey. And it's a fantastic birdwatching area. But certainly a lot of wildlife have been squeezed into smaller and smaller areas, just as suburbia grows here in New Jersey, and there's less agricultural land and more sort of strip mall and condo. We see people interacting with wildlife more often, and it's one of the reasons we handle 6,000 birds a year. It's just there's more people and less open space for animals.
Okay, and we have another question, this time for Dr. Jennifer Norton. It's from Wobies. Hopefully I'm saying that correctly. And this is a question about diseases. They're asking, is West Nile virus prevalent in New Jersey?
Yes, we've seen it on and off over the past, several years since it was discovered. But this year in particular, due to the wet spring and the prevalence of large numbers of mosquitoes, which are the carriers for it, we have seen quite a lot this year, and more than usual. The incidence has been very high. We actually had suspicions. We don't test every bird because the testing is expensive, and a lot of times the birds die before we even have a chance to test them. But we've come to learn the signs to look for. And birds that come in that have central nervous system signs, they're twitchy, they have muscle fasciculations, they have seizures, and they die within 24 to 48 hours. Those birds are high on our list for having West Nile. And this year we actually sent out multiple bodies for necropsy to the state to determine, and they did testing, extensive testing, and 90% of the birds that we sent out came back positive this year for West Nile virus. So yes, we see a lot of it. And unfortunately, it's a disease that hits the birds very hard, and supportive care doesn't always work. This year, out of all the birds that we saw that we suspected had West Nile, one bird survived and was released, which is very...
Well, that's very interesting. We got another question in that regard, and has to do very strong with human intervention. We've had this topic before from Sandy Williams. Do you get any patients suffering from lead poisoning?
Absolutely.
We do.
That's a very, very large part of what we see, because birds are shot. So many raptors come in. Raptors, gulls, waterfowl, lots of different birds that have been shot. And we x-ray almost everything that comes in, and especially things that we're suspicious of them having been shot if they have central nervous system signs, because that's what lead ultimately does, causes the central nervous system to fail. We always x-ray those birds, and if we see pellets, we try to get them out. But we also have what's called a bedside lead test kit, and any bird that has a reason, and it's a very quick test, it only requires a couple of drops of blood. So any bird that we suspect, because they're having green diarrhea or because they're having central nervous system signs or they're just weak in their legs, anything like that, we test those birds for lead. If the lead is over a certain amount, we start chelation therapy with them. So yes, we do see a lot of lead, unfortunately.
Quite a bit of the thing we see also is from birds ingesting the lead pellets. The top predators, like bald eagles in particular, don't always eat fish. They scavenge quite a bit. So if there's a deer, for instance, that may have been shot but not killed by a hunter, and it goes off and dies in the woods, but it's full of lead, and then the eagle feeds on that carcass, they'll ingest that. And the lead is processed in the body much more quickly, metabolized more quickly when it's ingested. So it hits them really, really hard. Also, waterfowl that may be eating at the bottom of a pond that has some lead pellets or lead sinkers from discarded fishing lures. That's another sort of category of birds that display a lot of symptoms of lead poisoning from ingestion.
Yeah, I was reading that there's higher rates of lead poisoning during big game season for the reasons that you said, is predators eating carcasses that might have been shot with lead pellets. And yep. I found it interesting, this coming year in California, they're actually going to make it illegal to hunt with lead ammunition, because previously it was only illegal to hunt for waterfowl with lead ammunition. But now they're going to expand that to all game in general. Do you know if there's anything like that going on in New Jersey?
Not to my knowledge. It's we could get off on a pretty wild political tangent here, but there are reasonable alternatives to hunting with lead. There's copper and steel shot that are available for particularly for things that scatter pellets. Shotguns and bird shot and buckshot in particular are the biggest offenders in that category. Rifles not quite so much, because it's one solid, very large slug. But when the pellets are being scattered, especially when they enter a body and then hit a bone, then they also shatter within the body. So they're tiny little pellets to begin with, and then they break up when they hit something. So it's I don't know. We've taken lead out of the paint that we use in our homes, and we've taken it out of the plumbing systems for municipal waterways, and we've taken it out of our pencils. Why? Because we've known for thousands of years that it's poisonous. So I'm not sure why we're still using it for hunting. It's well, my personal opinion. Do a better job in that area.
Actually, I have a question here from New York directly. That's Gentleman Goes. Procedural questions. I am driving on the road and I see an injured bird. Stop. And what do I do? Do I Google localwildlife.org? Well, it's a great question. Will they respond quickly? I presume I don't handle or attempt or transport the bird. So, yeah, that's a great question. Go ahead, please.
Well, it depends on what kind of bird it is. I think if it's a robin and a small songbird, you're probably okay picking it up. If it's a great horned owl or a golden eagle, you'd want to exercise a little more caution. But one of the things that today's technology has allowed us to do is exactly what your viewer just described. Google wildlife rehabilitator near me. Sometimes you'll be able to send someone a picture, and in 15 seconds they can tell you what kind of bird it is, and maybe even determine if it's injured. They may be able to call a local animal control officer or someone from the local rescue squad. If you're lucky, that rehab center is nearby. Some rehab centers, but not many, have the facility or the staff to go out and do a lot of the rescues themselves. We're so busy taking care of birds, we can't really go and pick them all up. So someone's got to get them to us. So sometimes we advise folks about how to pick up a bird carefully. And you do want to do that. You do want to be careful when you, especially if it's a big bird, even a heron, very sharp beak and a long neck. You know, it's not just the raptors that can be quite dangerous. But yeah, using your smartphone to find the local resources is a good first step, and then exercising a lot of caution if you're going to pick it up is a good second step.
So you guys are obviously trained professionals, and you know the protocols of how to handle these wildlife and everything, and never recommend for people to rehab animals on their own. How do you guys deal with like emotional attachment to some of these animals that you work with?
But people bring these animals here because they care. You know, no one would stop to pick up an injured cardinal on the side of the road and drive it 20 or 30 miles to a rehab center when it's clearly traumatized if they didn't really care. So we're successful at rehabbing the birds and getting them back into the wild about 50% of the time. That means about 50% of the time we're not successful. And you know, you have to have a bedside manner and be able to talk to people. It's not always about just handling the birds. It's about handling the people that come with the birds. It can be difficult. It can be very emotional for them. And it's emotional for us too, to see these people coming in and having to give them some bad news. Sometimes we have to euthanize an animal that has been in our care for a long time. And that's very difficult for the staff as well. And Jennifer can talk a little bit more about the toll that takes on the medical staff better than I can. But yeah, every bird comes here with a story and with a person attached to it. And handling that can be a pretty good diplomat sometimes.
Yeah, we got one comment and one question here on the West Nile. So Jill Weiss says, I brought in a blue jay to the Raptor Center, to the Raptor Trust, excuse me, who had West Nile. Maybe you remember that, but you get so many probably. So that's just a very nice comment here from Jill Weiss. And then another one from Diana Tyler. Can anything be done to reduce West Nile that wouldn't harm wildlife?
Controlling mosquitoes, definitely. You know, it's kind of a catch-22 because to control mosquitoes, you're using chemicals that could potentially harm other wildlife or the environment. But it's really all about mosquito control. And because the mosquitoes are the carriers, it's so that's kind of the bottom line. And you can't, it's difficult to control because you can't predict. It's weather related, it's mosquito related. So yes, other than that, you can't, there's nothing that we can really control with the birds because mosquitoes are going to bite birds. Mosquitoes biting mammals, mammals have lots of fur. They're less prone to the mosquito bites. Whereas birds, they have feathers that are easily, they have, you know, exposed faces, exposed legs, and they're very prone to being bitten by mosquitoes.
We're not going to get rid of all the mosquitoes.
Right.
That is not going to happen. And in order to do so, we would have to get rid of all the wetlands. So that's probably not something we even want to do. Yeah, it's I don't know that there would ever be some sort of vaccine. Who knows? You know, how would you even get it to the wildlife?
Right, exactly.
That is a tough one.
That is a tough one.
It is a cute duck.
We have another question from Terry Green, and it's a question about the amount of birds that you guys treat every year. They say, your website says the amount of birds you admitted increased from 2,000 in the 1990s to 6,000 in 2017. Is this due to some biologic interaction or due to your expansion? Thank you.
I think it's a combination of things. I think the human activity has increased in this area certainly over my lifetime. There's more and more people in urban environments, and there are more and more people therefore interacting with wildlife. I think that because we have been around a lot longer than some other wildlife centers, we're also pretty well known, so we've just grown. I also think that today's technology makes it really easy for people to get in touch with us. 25 years ago, if you found an injured bird on the side of the road, if you didn't know us, you would have to start making telephone calls, probably by dialing your old analog phone, and you would call your local vet or the police or rescue squad, or someone might know the local animal shelter, and maybe it was just a dog or a cat shelter. And it was sort of quite literally a game of telephone before you'd find a licensed wildlife rehabilitator. But today, as your viewer said before, what do I do? Just Google wildlife rehabilitator? Yeah, you can. And in 5 seconds, you can find us if you live anywhere, within 50 miles of us. So I think it's a combination of factors. But yeah, this year we're knocking on the door of 6,000 birds. I think we've taken in over 5,900 already, and there's still a few weeks left to go.
That's very impressive, really. And thank you again, all of you, for bringing in so many questions. There's a lot of interest here. It's really wonderful to see. So the next question here is from Sherry M. Hi, Sherry. When an injured bird comes into the facility, how do you know that they are in pain, and how do you treat their pain?
So every bird that comes in is initially triaged, and what that means is by the staff. And what that means is they are quickly evaluated, just a brief evaluation. And then because birds are so, they're very prone to stress. And so what we do is we briefly evaluate them, and then we put them away. We put them in a box there. We have an evaluation room, and we let them rest. So that they can calm down. It's in a dark place, and we don't do anything to them, because just handling a bird, and this is not only true with wild birds, this is actually true with the exotic birds, the birds that the domestic birds, the parrots, those types of birds. They also stress very easily. Their metabolism is extremely high, and they can die from just being handled. So we put them away for a few hours and don't handle them, don't do anything to them at all. And then we get them out and we fully examine them. And at that point, based on their injuries, we decide what type of supportive care they need. And usually they get supportive care first, meaning fluids, pain medication, appropriate antibiotics. If something is broken, it gets either temporarily wrapped until I can come in and evaluate. So all of that is done by the staff, by the medical staff. So assessing their pain, birds, yes, birds do feel pain. A lot of people, I've heard for years, oh, birds don't feel pain. No, they feel just as much pain as anybody else. So you look at them, and if they have a broken wing, if they have a laceration, yes, they're in pain. Obviously, they're in pain, and that pain needs to be treated.
Okay, and we have another question back to diseases. This is from Periscope, Stephen Canal. He asks, can birds transmit disease to humans?
Yes and no. So there are certain specifically parasitic diseases that can be transmitted to humans. Intestinal worms, if you're not careful, a lot of the diseases that birds get, because birds are a completely different category than mammals, and we are mammals, a lot of those diseases are not transferable, which is one reason that I really like working with birds, because it's easy to not worry about yourself. But yes, there are some specific diseases like psittacosis that can be aerosolized, transmitted, and you have to be very careful. But a lot of them, because their anatomy, their physiology is so different than mammalian physiology, people say, oh, pigeons are so dirty, don't handle them because you're going to get sick. Well, that's not always necessarily true, because most of the diseases are not transferable to humans unless it's through a vector.
Oh, sorry, I couldn't unmute the mic there for a second. This transferring disease between humans and birds, I hear it's a lot more common that diseases will be spread kind of between birds, and
Yes.
especially like at bird feeders in people's backyards. So maybe people think that they're helping out, but like, can you let people know maybe some things that they can do at home that might be helpful to these wildlife that might be suffering from diseases?
Clean your feeders. Be very vigilant in cleaning your feeders. There is a particular disease that is we see in house finches and goldfinches. We call it finch eye disease, but it's actually a bacterial disease called Mycoplasma gallisepticum, and it causes the finches. So the finches go into these feeders and they put their whole head into the feeder. Their eyes are right there on the feeder, and if another bird has been there that has this particular bacteria, then it spreads really quickly amongst these finches. And what it causes is horrible crusting of the eyes. The birds can't see, and then they're unable to eat because they can't see. They're unable to fly. We get a lot of these birds, and this was very newly discovered back in the early 90s. We had never seen it before, and it was researched. Now is very treatable disease. We see a lot of these birds, particularly in the winter when the feeders are out, and we treat almost 100% of them successfully, and they go back to the wild. So yes, keep sanitizing your feeders, sanitizing your bird baths is going to do a lot to prevent spread between birds.
Okay, and then another question from Sherry M again. And by the way, thanks to Osprey Mama and Sherry M for the donations. We really appreciate that. Thank you. So Sherry M says, do you get, that comes straight into your budget question, because it's very interesting how you keep such an organization at such a, with so many birds alive. Do you get state funding or mostly from the public?
We receive no state or federal funding. It's all private funding. We have a development staff. We write grant proposals to foundations. We get a lot of donations just from generous donors who come and visit us. We are open to the public. Part of the mission is education. It's not just rehabilitation. So our education department does programs both on-site and off-site. We do charge a fee, though it's a pretty reasonable one for that. We also have about 50 permanent resident birds here that people can come and visit. So most of the raptors that are native to New Jersey, hawks, owls, eagles, falcons, a couple of vultures, and 2 sort of honorary ravens, all live here. So folks can come and visit, and we have donation boxes available, but it's all private donations, and it's expensive to run. I'll tell you that much because I'm on the development staff. So if any of your folks want to share a little bit with you as well as with us, we'll take it.
Okay, so we have another question from Janny Bob, and she's asking, would bats help to reduce mosquitoes?
Bats?
Bats?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And the bat population globally is in really big trouble. They've been affected by a fungus that's really, really devastated many species. But yeah, they're excellent mosquito and insect control, and I encourage everybody to make peace with the bats and put up bat boxes and encourage bats to your neighborhood, because they will eat some bugs.
All right, and we have a picture up now of some fishing tackle that I think was caught around a raptor's foot.
Yeah.
And we're wondering if you could tell people how maybe they can prevent this from happening.
Clean it up. There's only one way that gets left, around the pond. Someone didn't clean it up. I understand that sometimes a lure may get caught in an overhanging tree, and it's really, really hard to get to. But increasingly, we see more and more birds getting tangled in fishing line. Earlier, you actually had shown a great horned owl that had a big fishing lure with a plastic worm right through its wrist, hook and all. We had to remove the hook from the back of the wing. We had to cut the a hook and push it all the way through the wing. Fortunately, that bird recovered sort of miraculously because it had quite a bit of muscle damage. But yeah, we see these lead sinkers and fishing lures and hooks and fishing line all over. One thing we've had some success with here in New Jersey is trying to get the local fishermen, sportsmen's clubs, scouts, and other civic organizations to do a yearly pond cleanup. We had that great horned owl that you showed before got a lot of press in the local social media and in local traditional media. And the folks in the neighborhood where that bird was injured were real concerned about it and organized their own pond cleanup. And they got literally hundreds of pounds of trash and old fishing line out of their own pond.
It's always good to hear about people organizing cleanups like that, and we have somebody that is also interested in keeping their feeder clean. Let me just find the name here. From... Oh, no,
yeah, that's right. It's okay. The next question was from Wobbies. Asking about what you do with the bird feathers, really. So is there a repository for bird feathers for the deceased bird, like cardinals and other songbirds with pretty plumage? Yeah, you know, like the eagle repository.
The eagle repository in Colorado is the biggest one. In Arizona, there's a wildlife center called Liberty Wildlife Center that's actually started a non-eagle repository. So they're trying to encourage people who would normally be applying for a permit to get one of the eagle feathers to use other raptor feathers. So we've actually sent them some feathers of some of the eastern species that we see, or more northern species. So we sent them some rough-legged hawk feathers and other things. I don't know of a repository for songbird feathers, but I would just remind everybody that even parts of birds, their nests, their eggs, and their feathers are all protected by the same law that you guys were talking about before, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. So just as it is illegal to keep a bald eagle in your living room, it's just as illegal to keep a cardinal feather in your hat. And that's not really to punish anyone. It's for the protection of the birds, because how would a law enforcement officer know that you didn't kill the bird to get the feather?
Right, that's a very good point. I never heard that argument. Rebecca, next question.
Yeah, we were wondering if Dr. Norton could explain what's going on in some of these X-ray photos that we've got up.
Sure. This is a bald eagle that was where you want to tell the backstory of the bald eagle first?
Yeah, it was found in a neighborhood here in New Jersey in Hunterdon County, and it had been sitting in a tree for a couple of days, and it hadn't been moving, and the people who lived in the neighborhood had been watching it, and they thought that they saw one of its legs dangling. And you can see it's got a pin in its leg here because the leg was badly damaged. But after a few days, the bird was so weak that it was eventually able to be captured, and it had been shot a couple of times, actually. It had pellets throughout its body, and Jennifer was inside this body several times. So I'll let her talk about that.
So this bird is one of the birds that was suffering from severe lead poisoning because of the lead pellets. And in one of these x-rays, you can see, I think that there are 2 lead pellets. They can't see me poking at the screen, can they? But the tibia tarsus was fractured, as you can see. Yeah, that's a post-op, I think. I'm not really sure. One of the, but the tibia tarsus was fractured because the lead pellet had penetrated the bone and it shattered. If you can see, and these pictures are kind of blurry for me, but the lead pellet shattered into multiple pieces, and we went in, we did surgery, we pinned the bone. It healed ultimately, but the problems that we had with the healing of this were due to the lead pellets that were remaining in the bone because they kept releasing their lead into the bloodstream. So we had to go in and remove the pellets from the body. There was one in the body cavity. There's one in the leg. I actually had to use ultrasound to locate these pellets because they were so deep. And the problem was with the shattered pieces that were in the callus itself, ended up causing nerve damage to this bird, to the leg. So after the pin was pulled, because we put the pin in, and then we wait for the callus to form, we wait for the bone to heal, and then after the bone heals, we pull that pin out. And there's a callus, there's the callus, and you can see that there are multiple pieces of lead still in there. And we considered redoing the surgery, going in and trying to take these find these pieces, but it's like finding a needle in a haystack. So we weren't able to do that. And what we ended up doing was testing the bird for lead. The lead would be high, we would chelate, and the bird would be fine for a little while, and then more lead would leach, and we would have to test the bird again. And this was an ongoing process for a long period of time. We ended up having to do physical therapy on this bird, and eventually he was able to be released successfully, but it was a long road due to the lead.
I think we had this bird in care for 11 months with multiple rounds of chelation, which is not easy on the body, and multiple surgeries, lots of nerve trauma and muscle trauma. There were a lot of discouraging moments, and quite a few times when other not so positive outcome options were discussed among the staff. But the bird, it wasn't given up. So, sometimes we take our cues from birds themselves. Some of them are really, really fighters, and this bird was, hanging in there. And since it's a bald eagle and our national symbol, and we gave it an extra try here and there. And after 11 months, we felt pretty comfortable releasing the bird. It was probably not 100% back to full strength on that one leg, but it was an adult bird. It had some success clearly hunting and surviving. It knew how to hunt. If we had to put it back in the wild with one leg, a little less than 100%. I mean, oftentimes we'll err on the side of giving that bird a shot back in the wild because the option is euthanasia and putting it in the freezer. And that's, probably not the choice the bird would make. They always want to get back into the wild if they can. So if we think that there's a reasonable chance that the bird can make a go of survival in the wild, that's the decision we make whenever we can.
Okay, so we have a lot of comments coming in, thanking you for all of the work that you do in rehabbing these birds. And we have a question again that was answered earlier, but just to remind people, from Gentleman Ghost. He's wondering what the percentage of admitted birds that are treated and released, and what the success rate is of those birds.
It's just about 50%. Which would be, at your local hospital, that wouldn't be a very good percentage if only, half of the people that walked into the clinic walked out. But the truth is, if you can walk up to a peregrine falcon on the side of the road and pick it up, there's already a really serious problem. So quite a few of the birds that we see that don't survive are not here for very long. They come in such advanced states of trauma that they often expire within 24 hours, and there's nothing that anybody could done for them. They're completely wrecked and shattered and traumatized, and they're practically DOA.
Birds are also, most birds, the majority of birds are birds that have they're not predators. They are, what's the word?
They're prey.
They're prey.
They're
yes. So they're very good at hiding their injuries. They can go a long period of time. And by the time somebody finds them, when they're just so debilitated, they can't fake it anymore. So by the time they find them and bring them to us, they're already past the point, unfortunately. And 50% is pretty average among rehabilitation for both mammals and raptors and birds. It's wild animals. 50% is actually pretty average, pretty normal.
Well, thank you. I mean, this channel is all about education. So Terry Green, hi Terry. Next question says, these images are very dramatic. I completely agree. Do you run a media campaign to alert and educate the public? And what can they do to prevent these injuries? What we can do, sorry, what we can do. Yes.
Well, we do have an education department. We offer public programs here on site and off site. Our educators speak with young people regularly. We do a lot of stuff in the local schools. We do stuff with the local scouts, but we speak with adults as well. We have corporate organizations that come here for afternoon retreats. We speak with garden clubs and civic organizations. We go to local libraries and do programs, garden clubs. I mean, all kinds of folks come and get some education here. And like a lot of other partner organizations here in New Jersey and around the country, we publish a lot of materials. Some of those are available on our website. For active campaigns, I mean, we have our website has some of the information on it, and we have, some social media and Facebook posts. Every once in a while, we have a particularly tragic story or a particularly positive outcome, and we'll push some information out on our Facebook page about that. So, if folks are interested specifically in what we're doing, you can check in with us on any of those channels. Or if you're anywhere nearby, come and visit. We're open to the public, and you can sort of learn about some of the birds. A self-guided tour that you can take around the campus and see some of the hawks and eagles and owls and falcons and read a little bit about them. We're nestled right here on the border of an 8,000-acre wildlife refuge, which is pretty fantastic considering we're only 25 or 30 miles from Manhattan. So we do provide a lot of education.
So another question about just back to how people can help. This is from Sandy Williams and Kelly Crosetto. And they're just asking what the best way is to sanitize their bird feeders, if there's a particular cleaner that works best or just the best way for them to do that.
I just use sort of a regular household disinfectant, empty out the seeds in the bottom, especially during the summer here. It gets really, really wet, and you'll see even after a week, they sort of get all sticky and crusty at the bottom. So I just kind of hose it out, and once it's wet, shake it up with a little Dawn or, dishwashing detergent, scrub it with a sponge if you can get in there, or a bottle brush or something like that if you've got one of the long tube, sort of squirrel buster style feeders. I don't know, Jen, do you think they need anything stronger than that?
A lot of times, if you're particularly worried, you have to clean, because no disinfectant works in the face of dirt or stuff, debris. And if you're particularly worried about a disease, after you clean, you can soak it in bleach, like a 1 to 10 dilute bleach solution. But you have to let it sit for at least 10 minutes. And then obviously after you bleach it, you need to rinse it very well before you put it back out, so that it has no residual bleach.
All right, we have another question. I was curious about this too. It's from Audrey Dietz. And so this is kind of related to Old Gal. When a raptor is released from your care, are they banded for future references? And then I was curious, if they are, what's the furthest you've ever found them, or do you get notifications from banding stations regularly?
Okay, there's a bunch of pieces to that puzzle. Yes, a lot of the raptors that we release are banded, but not all. More so the migratory birds and endangered species are banded. So there are probably some facilities that band a few more birds than we do, but screech owls, for instance, love them, great little guys, but they're generally speaking non-migratory. They spend most of their lives in a pretty small geographic area. We know a lot about screech owls, and they don't do a lot. They kind of hang around in their own little neighborhoods, and they live fairly short lives, usually in a very small area. So we could ban them, but we don't think we're going to be getting a whole lot of valuable scientific data about the life histories of screech owls at this point. So when we release a peregrine falcon that might go to South America, and at one point we were practically on the brink of extinction, or at least eradication here in New Jersey, we'll ban those birds, and we do report that data to the bird banding lab. And then when there is a return, we get a notification that one of our bands had been returned. We had a barn owl that was found in Bermuda at one point, and I don't, that shouldn't happen. I don't know how that happened. Our old gal, although we don't know where she traveled, we know that she lived a really, really long life in the wild. So it's always good to get a return, especially when that bird has gone a great distance or lived a long and productive life. It's pretty cool to see.
Yeah, here's an interesting question from Tigerlily 999. It seems like a naive question, but actually it's a very deep question, I think. Why do people shoot the birds? Is it illegal to shoot a bird?
It is illegal. There are certain games you can get a hunting license for ducks and geese at certain times of the year. But migratory birds, unless there is a specific game license for them, are all protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. And eagles, hawks, falcons are all protected now. That has not always been the case. Earlier in the last century, laws have really changed. At one point, it was legal to shoot them. There was even a bounty on some raptors. I know in Pennsylvania, goshawks in particular were felt to be a nuisance, and it was thought that they were perhaps taking poultry off farms. So you could shoot a goshawk and take it to the Pennsylvania Game Commission and actually get paid for its carcass. And that practice continued, I think, up until the 1960s. But what we really know now is that these predators are really beneficial. And would a goshawk eat a chicken? Yeah, given the chance, it probably would. But would it eat probably dozens and dozens of other things like mice and rats from your farm before it ate that one chicken? It probably would. So they're really beneficial for rodent control, and they are protected by law. I can't answer that question.
So you mentioned not long ago that people can come and visit the center and see a lot of the birds that have been treated there. But there's also a lot of birds that they don't see and that aren't, you don't allow humans to interact with those birds. Could you talk a little bit about the importance of not subjecting the birds to too much human contact?
Right. So we have two populations of birds. We have a group of permanent resident birds, our ambassador birds. They are all in one way or another unreleasable. Some have injuries that wouldn't allow them to fly. Some have injured legs, or the one-eyed eagle. Others are imprinted. There's nothing cuter than a little baby hawk, really. And sometimes people find them, and even with the best intentions, try to raise them on their own, and they become imprinted on people and don't really learn proper hawk behavior. They may not learn how to hunt or fend for themselves, and most of all, they don't learn to be afraid of the things they're supposed to be afraid of, like humans. So sometimes those birds are maybe physically capable of survival in the wild, but sort of not really mentally capable of survival in the wild. So we do have some birds that we keep here for educational purposes. And then for the rehab birds, I'll let Jen tell you a little bit about, sort of the enclosures that we keep them in and why.
Right. So the birds that are under rehabilitation that are going to go back into the wild, particularly the orphaned birds, particularly the young birds, those are all kept behind screens so that the public can't see them because, like Chris said, nothing's cuter than a sweet little baby bird. And everybody wants to smooch it. Everybody wants to, talk to it. And that's detrimental to raising this bird so that it can survive in the wild. Because the last thing we want to do is raise a great horned owl we're going to release, and it's going to turn around and land on somebody's head, because that's not appropriate, because the person doesn't know that the owl is just trying to be nice to you and saying, "Where's my mouse?" So those birds we keep behind screens so that the public does not have interaction with them. So that's the baby side. The other side is the injured birds. And as I said before, birds, especially wild birds, are very prone to stress, not only physical stress, but psychological stress. And if they see you, they think that you're a predator and they're afraid. So that is detrimental to their healing process. And we want to get them out of here as quickly as possible. So we don't want humans interacting with those birds in any way.
All right, that's a really good explanation. We have another question from Periscope, and this one's from P. Matzner 1. And they're asking, is climate change causing a lot of species to show up outside of their normal ranges?
Well, we've seen, I think, even just in the past 20 or 30 years here, the population dynamics changing of certain species that we handle. Some of that is habitat loss here. That we were talking a little bit earlier about sort of our urban and suburban encroachment here in New Jersey. So I don't know if that's exactly climate change, but certainly, you know, there's birds here that we see pretty regularly that we don't see as often as we used to, and birds that were once common here are becoming less and less common. I'm sure there's a variety of factors, but it would, I think, be naive to say that climate change isn't among them.
Yeah, it's a very difficult question, but I think it's a very relevant question. I'm actually happy to see that such questions are coming up. So here's a question, another from Sherry M. It has to do about the loss, really. How do you and your staff deal with losses, especially when they've been in your care for such a long time?
That's a tough one. Yeah, you know, we try, I guess, probably not to get too emotionally attached, especially to the rehabilitation birds. One, because the goal is to let them go. And two, there's always a possibility that they might not survive. So it's difficult to not get attached to some of these birds if you work hard on them. And for Jennifer, who, you know, cuts them open and sews them back together. You know, she knows them very, very well and pretty intimately. But for our permanent residents too, you know, there are some of the birds that have been here for a long, long time. You can actually develop a relationship with a bird. They recognize people. They know who some of our staff are. We all have favorites. The birds have favorites too. There's a barred owl here who's actually named after my father. And he hates my guts. He doesn't really like men anyway, and I wear a hat often, you know, for obvious reasons. And he just doesn't like guys, and he doesn't like hats. And he's a cute little barred owl who I have no close relationship with, unfortunately. But then we have another barred owl who's an older female who's really quite tolerant of me, and we seem to get along just fine. So yeah, it can be pretty emotional, you know, for the staff as well as for the people who bring the birds here.
It's also you have to be in this profession, you really have to be pragmatic about what you're doing. The hard part with the rehabilitation birds is not that you're getting emotionally attached to them, but the amount of work and time that you have put into them. We try and we try and we try and we put so much time into them, and then only to find that, wow, we tried everything, but it's been 3 months, 6 months, however many months. And now we really realize that this injury is just not going to heal. This bird has developed secondary things going on. And then you have to be pragmatic and do what's right for the bird and say, we don't want this bird to suffer anymore just because we want to keep going. And then you have to make a decision. It's a hard decision, but it has to be made.
Okay, so we have one more question, and then I think we're going to head to some quiz questions for the audience. So this is from Sasha68, Nicole B. They're asking, Dr. Norton, what is aspergillosis, and what are the signs a raptor has it, and do you see this often in raptors?
We do, unfortunately. Aspergillosis is a fungal disease. So aspergillus is a fungus. It is ubiquitous in the environment. That means it lives in the soil. It's everywhere in the environment. What makes birds so susceptible to this is their respiratory system. So it's a fungus that can be aerosolized. And if a bird is under stress, physiological stress in particular, but also psychological stress, as in being in captivity, and they have something else going on, these fungal spores, they breathe them in, and they can seed inside the respiratory tract and start to grow. Normal birds can fight this off. Their immune system is sufficient to fight this off. But what happens is when birds are trying to already fight off other diseases or heal an injury, they become very susceptible to this fungus seeding in there and growing. And what we see, the signs that we see that we're suspicious of, is breathing issues. they'll start just having very shallow breathing, or we can actually hear that their breathing has changed when we listen to their lungs. If they start losing weight, just any little thing that we're suspicious of, then we can take x-rays. Some of these birds we can actually scope. We go in with an endoscope and we can look around inside to look at these plaques to see if they're there. But most birds that are at high risk, we put on preventative medication to prevent this from happening in the first place, because preventative antifungals, because we know that they're already trying to fight something else off. So we don't want that to even have a chance to seed.
Okay, I'm going to comment with a last and final question because it got so interesting. And then I forgot to tell you, just think of one nice quiz question. We always have a quiz question. I'm sure you can think of something, but make it a bit challenging, please. You know, don't make it too easy. Just anything you can think of. So I'll leave that in the background. But let me, in the meantime, ask the final question. Is number 20 here on our list. Is from Audrey Dietz. I'm not sure if I pronounce your name correctly, but the question is great. What is the rarest and biggest surprise that came into the rehab for you?
Dr. Jen Norton.
Thank you.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love it.
Wow. Well, we've had some oddball birds here for sure. There was an African lappet-faced vulture with about a 10-foot wingspan that came in here, 25 years ago. But it was actually an escapee from a zoo in South Jersey. It did not cross the Atlantic in a horrible storm. We've had some interesting pelagic birds, ocean birds. So we're not real far from the coast here, but we don't normally see scoters and tube-nosed birds like skimmers. We had a storm petrel, I think a Wilson's storm petrel in about 2 years ago, and those are really unusual. If you're out on a boat deep sea fishing off the coast of New Jersey, you might see these birds, but they rarely come inland. So we're only 30 miles from the shore. We might get those birds blown in from time to time, but when they come in for rehab, we sort of go, uh-oh, yeah. What now? Right. We don't really have the facility to treat some of those birds, but we do have partners who have good rehab centers a little closer to the coast, and we can often transfer those birds to folks that have a little more experience with them.
Well, thank you. That was absolutely wonderful. I just have to see if I get, yes, there's our number. I actually managed to get it in because I thought I may have forgotten it. So I'm going to just tell our listeners, we're going to take only one question because it's getting very late on the East Coast. And if you're just so, well, can you just come up with a question, an interesting question for our audience, a quiz question? Then what we do is we give away a picture. The one who dials in and gets it correct gets a picture to win. That's the idea.
Okay, so it can't be like, if you were a bird, what would your bird superpower be? That's sort of not. That's a little too subjective. Oh, okay. Sheesh. Gosh, I don't know. Rebecca, you gave away the good one about the number of breeding pairs of eagles in the state early in the program. Let's see here. Who can tell us the Latin scientific name of the American kestrel?
Very good, excellent. Now they're going to Google
no consulting your Simply guide.
Now they're going to Google like crazy.
No consulting Google.
Yeah, you know what? Oh, there you go. Okay.
None of that.
None of that. You know what? I would have asked them if they would pay attention. What was the name of the vulture that you mentioned that was so rare? That's the question. I would have really, because they can't Google that. They cannot flip back. Well, they could.
Right.
No. But anyway, that's good. Okay. So
American kestrel.
Yeah, there you go. They're probably going to they're going to look that one up. And anyway, so you've got your number here. That's the Washington number that we have. So just dial in and try and get through. So the first one can answer the question. and we'll wait for that. Well, in the meantime, if there's anything, tell us a little more about. I was just curious about this vulture. Maybe you can just elaborate whilst we get some.
Oh, it was a classic looking vulture. It reminded me of God. What was the Disney film that had the four vultures that were like the Beatles?
Was it
what you want to do? I don't know what you want to do. What you want to do? I don't know. And big, hulking, sort of the collar and the large, decurved, clunky beak, and just 9.5 or 10-foot wingspan. It was enormous, and fortunately, we were able to return it to the facility it had escaped from, and it was, I think, healthy. But man, it's just so massive. Maybe folks in California who are used to seeing the occasional condor have some experience seeing a bird that large, but wow. I mean, around here, people see a red-tailed hawk and they're like, "Oh, that's huge!"
Yeah,
it was like 3 times that size.
Yeah, well, I just have to think when I was in Dutch Harbor with Jack Molen. He's a captain of a fisher boat, and that's on the Aleutian Islands. I was amazed how big the eagles are there. They're a lot bigger than the ones we have here, or the ones you have in Florida or anywhere else. Right?
Yeah, so. Interesting. The bald eagles, even in North America, vary quite a bit in size.
Right. So, I don't know if anybody's going to dial in. We'll wait.
Did I stump everybody? All right, go ahead and look at your field guide.
I'm sure they'll do that. Let's see if they can pronounce it correctly.
Yeah, right. No Latin experts. I don't know, Christian. Maybe you've got a better question. I guess.
No. We'll leave it at that. That's fine. Jennifer, I just would like to know, because he said you were the rarest or the most wonderful thing that came in, which I thought was a very beautiful, spontaneous reaction. So I just wanted to know. Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
So, about myself, this facility was my inspiration to become a vet. In many years ago, I brought one of the first, what I was talking about, the house finch with the mycoplasma disease. I was one of the people who found one of the first birds that had that and brought it to this facility. And when I walked in the door and saw everything that was going on, all the medical stuff that was going on, all the words that these people were saying that I had never heard of before, like coracoid. That's a bird word. I've never heard that. People don't have that. And I was like, this is what I want to do. This is absolutely what I want to do. So I volunteered, I became a staff member, and then eventually, at the insistence of multiple people and the encouragement of multiple people here, I ended up going to vet school and studied under one of the renowned Raptor surgeons, who he's an expert in the field, has written many books, many articles. He's now retired, Dr. Patrick Reddig. I studied under him directly and learned much from him. And then when I came back here after vet school, I had the opportunity to study under Dr. Major, who had been the vet here for 30 years. And he taught me everything. And then when he retired, I was able to continue his work. I was lucky enough to be able to continue his work here. So
that's an incredible story. Well, we all have a lot of respect for you, and especially my teams also said, what a wonderful job you're all doing, and you can imagine you have a lot of fans and supporters here. So I don't think there's anybody calling in, which may also be a technical problem, or maybe they say, well, I'm going to call in, but I don't feel good about it because I looked it up, whatever. Maybe a guilt.
Latin's hard to pronounce.
Yeah,
there's a bit of a guilt question, unless we have another veterinarian here who will dial in. So it doesn't really matter, it's fine. So I think what we'll do is sorry?
Get him to say it. Could you pronounce the name for us?
Yeah, that's right.
I can pronounce it, but I have no idea if it's correct.
go ahead.
Well, the American kestrel is a small falcon, and all the birds in the falcon genus are falco, and the kestrel is Falco sparvarius.
Very good. So say that once more, please.
Falco sparvarius, once upon a time called the sparrowhawk.
So Falco sparvarius, right? That's it. Good. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, and thanks so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it, and I also wanted to thank Nicole again for getting into contact. I know that she's been following, she's been following the Raptor Trust for many, many years. So she's a very dedicated wildlife supporter and lover. So it's very nice she took the initiative. So thanks a lot, and thanks also to my team, to Jenny and Susie for coming in together with Nicole and supporting this. So what I'll do is I'm just going to say goodbye, and I'll talk to you in a few minutes. So once again, thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it. It's been so.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
And I will come to New York one day. I will. I like to travel, and it's much nicer for me actually to be there and interview you directly. So I'm inviting myself now. Just
okay. Well, we're open to the public, so everybody's welcome, even you.
So you can't really prevent me from coming.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. It was wonderful to have you, and I'll be with you in a moment. Okay. Thanks.
Cheers.
Okay, well, this was most wonderful, and that was a great first show. Thank you, Rebecca. That was some great questions you came up. So nobody actually dialed in. I'm just going to put a bit different background picture on, so that's much better. And next week, I don't even know what we have next week. I think we're improvising, right?
Something amazing.
Something amazing. Yeah, that's a good thing. So next week we're going to have something amazing. We don't know what it's going to be, but it'll be something amazing. Then I'm off to Brazil, actually, with my wife for very interesting. If I find any wildlife there, and there's lots, I'll do a spontaneous broadcast from there. But so in the meantime, do tune in next week. So thanks for all your questions. Thanks to all the viewers on YouTube, on Facebook, and also on Periscope. Thank you. It's getting a bit late, and I'm very hungry actually. So it's been most wonderful. Yeah. Any last words?
Just thank you, and I'm really excited to be on the show, and just keep sending in your awesome questions.
Okay, very good. So I'm going to say goodbye now slowly, because I have to switch off channel by channel here. So let me just do this quickly so I get this correct. So first I'll say goodbye to all our YouTube viewers. So thank you very much.